Shalom, my friends. This week, our Torah world lost one of its most eloquent spokespersons as the great Rabbi Jonathan Sacks passed away, and our world sits Shiva for Rabbi Sacks. The verse that states in our portion about Avram, the verse says, Avraham zakein ba bayamim, and Avram grew old with days. Hashem beirach es Avraham bakol, and God blessed Abraham bakol, with everything. So the Midrash explains that this means, what does it mean, ba bayamim? He grew old in his days. Midrash explains that this means that every single day of Abraham's life was lived to its fullest. He lived every day to its maximum capacity of serving Hashem. That was what Avram Avinu did. That's why it says about him, Avraham ba bayamim. And so too, we could say with respect to Rabbi Sacks and the impact that he had on our world with his days, we could say that he was ba bayamim, and he was a person who lived life to its fullest and served Hashem every single day. Our portion of Chayei Sarah begins with the words that Sarah died, Vayavo Avraham l'spod Sarah v'livkota, that Avram came to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. The Torah, the word v'livkosa, to cry for her, the word livkosa has an os kitana. It has a small chaf. The letter chaf is written small. Whenever there's a letter that's written small, the reason why it's written small is to teach us that we have to diminish some aspect of the subject matter. And what's being diminished by crying for her is that the crying was not so great, because really, even though Sarah's guf has died and her guf left the world, but the good deeds that she taught continued to permeate throughout the world. The good deeds that she did and the teachings that she brought to the world, they continued to permeate even though her guf departed from the world. So too we could say about Rabbi Sacks that while his guf has departed, his neshama will permeate the world for many, many, many years to come through the many inspirational words of Torah that Rabbi Sacks shared and will continue to share with us through looking at his Divrei Torah every week for that Shabbos and through his videos. And I believe that much more will come out after the Shloshim. We're going to see that his students and the communities will discover more and more of his writings and will be inspired by his words for many years to come. There's a beautiful thought from Rabbi Sacks on Parshas Chayei Sarah, because Rabbi Sacks notes that the pasuk tells us that after Avraham died, it said that both Yitzchak and Yishmael united to bury Avram. That's what it says in chapter 25, verse 9. The fact that Yitzchak joined with Yishmael and Yishmael joined with Yitzchak to bury Avram is strange, because the last we heard of Yishmael was when he was banished by Avraham into the wilderness. And now all of a sudden, after Yishmael was banished, why is he combining back with Yitzchak to bury Avraham? So Rabbi Sacks explains that Chazal understood that Yitzchak and Avram went to extraordinary efforts to reunite the family after Sarah's death. The first time that we know that Yitzchak meets Rebecca, it tells us at the end of chapter 24 that Yitzchak was in a place that's called Be'er L'chai Ro'i. Be'er L'chai Ro'i only appears one other time in the Torah. That's the place where when Hagar ran away from Avram and Sarah's house, we're told that an angel visits her in a place called Be'er L'chai Ro'i and tells her to go back because she will have a son, and that son will be named Yishmael. So argues Rabbi Sacks that Yitzchak had traveled to Be'er L'chai Ro'i in order to reconcile with Yishmael. Second piece of evidence that Rabbi Sacks argues it from is that the Torah tells us that after Sarah died, Avram takes another wife whose name is Keturah. But, says Rashi in the Midrash, that Keturah is actually just another name for Hagar. That Avram went to reunite with Hagar. When Sarah was alive, he sent Hagar away out of respect for Sarah. But after Sarah's death, he reunites with Hagar, and that can also be part of the reason why Yishmael is reconciled with Avram. And third, Rabbi Sachs cites a midrash from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. The midrash tells us that Avram traveled to Yishmael to try and bring him back and to try and see if Yishmael had done tshuva, if he had repented. And Avram disguised himself as just a traveler. And when he comes to Yishmael, he knocks on the door. The first time, Yishmael's wife answers the door. She sees a strange old man there, a stranger, an old man. She says, "Get out of here." She doesn't give him water or food, and she sends him away. When Yishmael comes home and he hears about this, he divorces his wife. And Avram returns a second time. This time, the wife embraces the old man, welcomes him into her home, feeds him water and drink, feeds him water and food, and this time Yishmael understands that this is Avram, and Avram understands that Yishmael has repented, and the two reconcile. Rabbi Sachs points out that according to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, this new wife, the second wife of Yishmael, her name is Fatima, who Rabbi Sachs points out Fatima is also an important figure in Islam because Fatima is the daughter of the Prophet. So therefore, says Rabbi Sachs that this is an inspiration for us. We should draw an inspiring lesson for our times from the midrashic reconciliation of Yitzhak and Yishmael. Says Rabbi Sachs, there is a story here of immense consequence for our time. Jews and Muslims both trace their descent from Abraham. Jews through Isaac, Muslims through Yishmael. And beneath the surface of the narrative in Chayei Sarah, the sages read the clues, pierce together a moving story of reconciliation between Avram and Yitzhak on the one hand, and Hagar and Yishmael on the other. Yes, there was conflict and separation, writes Rabbi Sachs, but that was the beginning, not the end. Between Judaism and Islam, there can be friendship and mutual respect. Avram loved both his sons and was laid to rest by both. There is hope for the future in this story of the past. There is hope for the future in this story of the past. Unfortunately, there's a clear contrast with this story of Yishmael and Yitzchak, this reconciliation as portrayed by Chazal and Rabbi Sachs, and the contrast comes from the passage selected by our sages to be the Haftorah for Chayei Sarah. It comes from the first book of Kings, chapter 1, verses 1 through 37. The Haftorah tells us of the last days of David HaMelech, of King David, of his life, and the jockeying that occurred over the people in the royal palace, over who gets to be his heir to the throne. King David, we know at the end of his life, was old and feeble. Echoing the words of the Abraham narrative, we're told that David was Zakein Baba Yamim, Vamelch David Zakein Baba Yamim. Just like by Abraham, it says that Avram was Zakein Baba Yamim, so too with David HaMelech, it says he was Zakein Baba Yamim. When the text uses these words about Abraham, it goes on to tell us, Hashem beirachat Avraham bakol. God blessed Abraham with everything. It also tells us that Avram reacted to his advanced age by arranging for his son Yitzchak to get married. He called to his assistant, his servant, and he said, help Yitzchak get married. Yet, when these words appear in the life of David Zakein Baba Yamim, these words introduce us to a man who is feeble, is no longer in control. The text tells us about David that they covered him with garments. V'lo yichamlo. He was unable to be warmed by these garments. And this is not just a physical description. It demonstrates the turmoil that existed in David's kingdom. He wasn't able to be comforted or warmed because there was no warmth around him. David's son Adoniyahu was maneuvering. As his father was weak and feeble, Adoniyahu was maneuvering to be the presumptive king. He was maneuvering and acting as though he was king. And he attracted several very important advisors to his camp. Yoav ben Tzruya, who was a thorn in David's side. And on the other hand, the prophet Natan, when he heard what Adoniyahu was up to, and David's wife, Bathsheba, they wanted Shlomo HaMelech, who was still a young boy, to be appointed king. Since Shlomo was a young boy, the assumption is that Natan and possibly Bathsheba were really the ones who were trying to assume power at this point. And the story of the Haftorah foreshadows the violence that would occur as Shlomo would soon order Adoniyahu to be taken from the altar and put to death. The Talmud tells us in Baba Basra 15a, the Talmud tells us that Jeremiah is the author of the Book of Kings. Jeremiah is the author of the Book of Kings. And this indicates that in the rabbinic tradition, the rabbis view the Book of Kings as a retrospective history intended to teach us how we went from such heights of King David to the destruction of the temple and the exile from our land. Jeremiah is looking back on the history of the Jewish people and tells us where it all went wrong. Based on this opening chapter, Jeremiah's answer is that it went wrong right at the very beginning. Right at the end of David's life, we see the problems as evidenced by the fighting between the camp of Adoniyahu and the camp of Shlomo HaMelech. The end of Avram's life brought about a harmonious reconciliation between his sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael, while the end of David's life was a harbinger for the infighting and fratricide that would eventually destroy our temple. Our responsibility as Jews is to continue in the ways of Abraham and Yitzchak and Yishmael, and not in the ways of Adoniyahu and Shlomo. In this sense, the Book of Kings should be read as a prophecy by Jeremiah, another one of Jeremiah's prophecies, telling us what will happen to all of us if we continue down the path of family fighting. This is an especially relevant message for me today, in the days after a deeply disturbing and difficult and acrimonious election. We must all find it within ourselves to build a bridge, even and especially with people who don't vote like we might vote or share our politics. That's our responsibility, is to build a bridge as individuals. Well, how do we build such bridges? The first thing we can do is we could start simply by being kind. Rabbi Sachs taught us that this idea of chesed is so powerful. The word chesed in the Bible is such a powerful idea that it caused there to be an additional word in the English language. Writes Rabbi Sachs, in 1535, Miles Coverdale published the first ever translation of the Hebrew Bible into English. The work had been begun by William Tyndale, who paid for it with his life, burnt at the stake in 1536. It was when he came to the word chesed that he realized that there was no English word which captured its meaning. It was then that to translate it, he coined the word loving kindness. The most important character trait in choosing a matriarch for our people when the servant of Abraham went out is not intelligence, but kindness, v'chesed. Torah tells us that when Avram's assistant came to find a wife for Yitzchak, his main criteria was looking for a person who portrayed these qualities of chesed. He said, if I'm going to stand by the water by the well and ask for water to drink, and she'll say, I'll give to you, and I'll also give to your camels who drink an enormous amount of water. That's a person who demonstrates chesed. She will be the one who's appropriate for the wife of Yitzchak. This concept of chesed, of simply being kind, is a very simple but also very powerful idea. In one of his Divrei Torah, Rabbi Sachs refers to a story that took place right here in Washington, D.C. Back in 1966, there were many neighborhoods, unfortunately, in Washington, D.C. that were segregated. There were white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods. And Baruch Hashem, our neighborhood where our shul is, Shepherd Park, is not like that. But back then, that's what D.C. was like. In that year, an 11-year-old boy named Stephen moved with his family to a white neighborhood in Washington. And the boy remembers that first day when he moved to the neighborhood, he was sitting on the front steps of his Cleveland Park house with his two brothers and his two sisters as white person after white person walked by and didn't look at him. Nobody smiled, nobody said hello. He remembers feeling like he definitely did not belong in this neighborhood. He remembers feeling like all the things he was warned about by his friends in Harlem, that it would really be really hard to move to a white neighborhood. All these fears were now coming true. Years later, Stephen writes, I knew we were not welcome here. I knew we would not be liked here. I knew we would have no friends here. I knew we should not have moved here. And as he was thinking these sad thoughts, suddenly a white woman coming home from work passed his house. And she saw him and his siblings and she said, wait right here. Don't go anywhere. She ran into her house and brought them out a tray of sandwiches and drinks. Years later, Stephen says that moment changed his life forever. He wrote that when she brought him the sandwich, a simple sandwich, her actions told him that he belonged. It gave him the confidence and strength he needed to succeed. Young Stephen grew up to be one of the most influential professors, law professors in the country, Stephen Carter. And he later wrote a book called Civility, in which he spoke about this moment and the woman Sarah Kestenbaum, Zichronah Livracha, who brought him these sandwiches. He wrote that Sarah was motivated by this Jewish concept of chesed. These are the words of Rabbi Sachs, quoting Stephen Carter. In the Jewish tradition, he notes, such civility is called chesed, the doing of acts of kindness, which is in turn derived from the understanding that human beings are made in the image of God. Civility, Carter adds, itself may be seen as part of chesed. It does indeed require kindnesses towards our fellow citizens, including the ones who are strangers, and even when it's hard. To this day, he adds, I can close my eyes and feel on my tongue the smooth, slick sweetness of the cream cheese and jelly sandwiches that I gobbled on that summer afternoon when I discovered how a single act of genuine and unassuming civility can change a life forever. The woman who brought him those sandwiches, her name was Sarah Kestenbaum. And many people from our congregation remember Sarah Kestenbaum because she was a member of Tifereth Israel, which is across the street from our congregation. Says the verse, Hashem beirach et Avraham bakol. God blessed Abraham with everything. What does it mean to be blessed with everything? One interpretation in the Talmud is that it means that Yishmael repented. He changed his ways. He had harmony with Avram. To be blessed with everything means to have harmonious relationship. The second interpretation is offered by the great Reb Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. Says the great Reb Levi Yitzchak, the true tzaddik does not want a blessing if he's the only one to receive a blessing. That's no blessing. The true tzaddik doesn't want a blessing unless the others all around him are also blessed. And so, in order to bless Avram, Hashem had to bless everyone in the world. Hashem beirachas Avram bakol. Everyone in the world was blessed alongside Avram. To be blessed with everything, beirachas Avram bakol, to be blessed with everything means that all must be blessed. We must work together to find a blessing for all. We can't end all the divisiveness that exists in the world. It's just not possible. But through simple acts of everyday chesed, we can act to change the world, one act at a time, by remembering that the world is made up of all of us, and that it's our responsibility to bring a blessing to all. It's our responsibility to bring a blessing to all. Thank you.